Hey everybody, my name's Christina and I'm an English education major. I am really excited to share with you the big connections I made. In my novel, I chose to read An Abundance of Katherines by John Green, which was published in 2006 and was the winner of the Michael L. Prince Award for Excellence in YA Literature. So it is definitely an acclaimed book in the literature world, and it's also something that I enjoyed reading as well. Here's what the cover looks like, fancy, right? So I, again, have really enjoyed working with all of you, and I am excited to work together with this literature circle and get some great discussions going. So before I start with my discussion, a couple things you should know. First of all, I have like a bajillion notes, so if you see me looking down a lot, that's what I'm doing. And also, I want to share with you some quotes in the actual book, so you might have to be patient with me as I flip through and find them all. So if you see me, that's what I'm doing. But first of all, let's get kind of a summary of the plot and an idea of the main characters in the setting. So when we start the book, we find Colin Singleton, who is the main protagonist. He has just graduated from high school, and he is heartbroken over the loss of Catherine number 19, and she is called K19, K, you know, with Roman numerals, all kinds of things, but essentially she's called Catherine 19 because there has been 18 other Katherines in Colin's life who he has dated and been dumped by. Poor kid, right? And Colin has a best friend named Hassan, and Hassan comes into his house. You know, Colin is heartbroken, and he's like, man, we're going on a summer road trip. So Hassan and Colin go on this road trip, and they end up in a town called Gutshot, Tennessee, which is essentially Nowheresville, and they find themselves with new jobs and lots of new summer adventures. So we followed them on that journey. So some things you should know about the protagonist, Colin. He was a child prodigy. So he was wicked smart. His dad is a sociologist, and he encouraged his super fast learning abilities. And he is really good at memorizing things. He's really good at anagrams, so the book is full of those. But his friend, his son, kind of describes his intelligence and says that he's really no smarter than any of the rest of us. And he has an interesting way of putting it that I think will give you some insight into the protagonist's character. So on page 91 of the book, his son, who again is his best friend, says, so he's responding to someone who says, you know, what's up with this Colin kid? Why is he so smart? Does he memorize everything? How does he know all this stuff? And his son says, no, it's not like that. It's like if you or me sat down and read a book about, say, the presidents, and we read that William Howard Taft was the fattest president, and one time he got stuck in a bathtub. That might click in our brains as interesting, and we'd remember it, right? Well, you and me will read a book and find 3 interesting things, and we remember them. But Colin finds everything intriguing. He reads a book about presidents, and he remembers more of it because everything he reads clicks in his head as fucking interesting. Honestly, I've seen him do it with a telephone book. He'll be like, oh, there are 24 listings for Tischler. How fascinating. So that gives you an idea of Colin's smartness, right? So he is just fascinating with learning, and he is crazy good at it. And he doesn't want to just be a child prodigy anymore. He's gotten lots of attention for it. He was the winner of a game show, and he's sick of that life. He wants to move on to the rank of genius, and he makes the distinction between child prodigy and genius by saying a child prodigy can learn things that other people have invented very quickly, but a genius can invent new things. So he is on his journey to invent the theorem of underlying Catherine predictability. So basically what that is he makes a distinction between dumpies and dumpers and strives to create a formula that will predict who in the relationship will be the dumper, who will be the dumpy, and how long the relationship will last. So it's pretty genius of him, right? And there's lots of actual cool math in this book that I wish I could understand, but English ed, not math ed. So if you are math ed, you will probably get it a lot more than me, and it is awesome. But John Green makes it very accessible for even, you know, non-math lovers. But anyway, so let's talk about the setting for just a second. There is nothing academic at all about this book. About the setting of this book, excuse me. It is set, like I said, on a summer vacation, the summer before they go to college, so they are not thinking about school. And they are adult-free, no parents, right? So no accountability, so that's fun. And Colin, he's a forever learner, like we talked about, and his friend Hassan is a doer of nothing. And he is very proud of that. But I saw, so even though this doesn't occur in a classroom, I did see lots of developmental issues going on that definitely relates to our course content. So I'm going to walk through all 4 types of development that were listed for us and hopefully make some big connections. So here we go. All right, so the first type of development is physical development. And we've learned that lots of adolescents are just plain awkward physically, right? It's like somebody reached into a goodie bag of body parts and pulled them on and plastered them on faces, and they're just awkward, nothing matches, and that can lead to lots of feelings of insecurity, self-consciousness, eating disorders, lots of bad things for our students. So the main characters in this book, Colin and Hassan, are not movie star, fictional, gorgeous teenage boys. They are very real, right? Colin is the typical skinny nerd, and Hassan is the typical fat kid, oddly enough. And they kind of own their unattractiveness and don't seem to exhibit a lot of self-consciousness. So let's talk about that a little bit more. Hassan is constantly joking about his undying need and love for Hardee's Monster Thick Burgers, which I will attest to. They are pretty darn delicious, but he talks about that all the time, and he kind of uses his fat kid card in some pretty funny ways, and it's used as a source of comic relief. So on page 88 of the book, what's happening is it's their first day of work, and Colin wants to go home early. He's like, I am sick of this, and so Hassan says, all right, I got this. I'm going to play a fat kid joke. And he says, fat kid asthma attack. It's the oldest trick in the whole fat kid book. Just follow my lead. So then Hassan starts wheezing. His every inhalation sounded like the cry of a dying duck. Exhale. Exhale. Okay. I've seen asthma attacks before. And this, I mean, it is used as a source of comedy in this particular setting, but there's not a whole lot of self-consciousness here, you know? It is, they are owning it and using it to their every advantage. And later in the novel, both Colin and Hassan's love interests actually talk about how delicious their physical appearance is. So Colin's girl talks about how, you know, his bony frame is attractive, and then Hassan's talked about, you know, his full and squishy rolls, or I don't know, something like that. So it's interesting that there's not a lot of self-consciousness about these guys. And then Lindsay, who is the primary female character in the novel, she shared a different perspective, which is extremely interesting to me. So on page 67, she talks about her physical transition from middle school to high school, and shares lots of things. So I'm going to read this, and it's kind of a long passage, but it has some really good implications, so bear with me. So Lindsay is talking, and she's reminiscing about middle school when she says, so I was ugly. I was never fat, really, and I never wore headgear or had zits or anything, but I was ugly. I don't even know how ugly and pretty get decided. Maybe there's like a secret cable of boys who meet in the locker room and decide who's ugly and who's hot, because as far as I can remember, there was no such thing as a hot 4th grader. I got picked on a lot. I'm not going to bore you with stories about how bad it was, but it was pretty bad. I was miserable, and so in 8th grade, I went all alternative. Hollis and I drove to Memphis and bought me a whole new wardrobe, and I got me a Zelda haircut and dyed it black and stopped going outside in the sun, and I was like half emo and half goth and half punk and half nerd chick. Basically, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but it didn't matter because the middle school was in Milan, Tennessee. I'd never seen emo or goth or punk or nerd chick. I was different, that was all. And I hated all of them, and they hated me for an entire year. And then high school started, and I decided to make them like me. I just decided. It was so easy, dude. It was so easy. I just became it. If it walks like a cool kid, and talks like a cool kid, and dresses like a cool kid, and has the right mix of naughty and nasty and nice like a cool kid, it becomes a cool kid. And has but I'm not an asshole to people. There's not really even popularity at my school. So this is a really interesting transition for her physically, right? Because she goes from this ugly kid then to the goth chick, and then kind of makes a full circle and turns into like a popular preppy girl. So I thought that was a really interesting transition for her physically. And also, her perception of herself is far more negative than the male characters that we talked about, right? Like she calls herself ugly, quite a few times, and it made me wonder about the difference in perception between males and females in this novel. So instead of owning her physical, she seems to be appearance, she seems to be a little bit more self-conscious. And I wonder if this distinction is intentional on John Green's part. In my adolescent psych class, we learned a lot about the differences in male versus female self-consciousness, about their physical appearance, and it seems to be a general rule that females do tend to be a little bit more self-conscious. And I could go on a tangent about how fascinating that is and the cultural implications and oh my gosh, what are we doing to our young girls? But basically, I think it's really important that we are aware that these physical developmental issues are occurring and they can cause all kinds of emotional stress and issues. And think about, like, why are these girls a little bit more self-conscious? So I thought that was really interesting. And another point I thought was cool with that is, since she did do this whole full circle thing, was how important it is for us not to stereotype our middle schoolers, right? So just because Lindsay went through this goth punk stage doesn't mean that she was confined to a life of, drug abuse, screamo music, criminal activity. No, it was just a phase. So we never want to confine our students to a particular role and hinder their physical or emotional development in any way. Okay, so another thing about physical development is the sexual maturity that adolescents find. So this whole book is centered around the desire for, lack of, loss of sexual and romantic relationships. So as you would expect, in a YA book, there are a lot of drama surrounding these relationships. And I will spare you all the smutty details, just read it. But the main point is that the characters are very sexually mature in this book. They are curious, and this is a huge source of stress and concern for them. So it's important for us to understand this, because the same type of adolescents will be walking into our classroom with all kind of stress and concern about their sexual and romantic relationships, and we need to find ways to respect them and support them through this really challenging adolescent development. Alright, so that's all I have for physical development. So let's talk about the social and emotional development of the characters in this novel. So adolescents, as we've learned, are basically on a roller coaster of emotions that they don't really understand, but they feel really intense and really real for these kids. Like I said earlier, when we meet Colin, he is laying face down in the carpet of his room, depressed, over K-19. And then the next chapter, he is spontaneously in the car on a road trip. And that was a big change. And another emotion that I thought really illustrated how kind of crazy these emotions can get is found on page 174. I'm not really going to give you context for this quote because it would be a spoiler. But I'm just going to read you a sentence and then we'll talk about it. So, for reasons that he didn't understand, Colin felt a pulsing rage and he took off toward the graveyard. He didn't stop running until he... Okay, blah, 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 blah. So, basically, he felt a pulsing rage, right? Like, that is an intense emotion. Whoa. But what ensued was like a hoedown throwdown, and there was punching and all kinds of testosterone-driven activity. And he's not really sure what to do with these emotions, right? So he charges into the situation all, robust and I don't know, but and that probably wasn't the best way to deal with his emotion. And the same kinds of things happen when he's grieving the loss of K-19. He calls her, then he feels worse, and he's trying to cope, and he's really unsuccessful. And our job as educators is to help our adolescents through these times and to help them figure out strategies to cope better and figure out what to do with all of those emotions. And in this novel, there's a lot of worry about emotions when it comes to adolescence, and basically all of that worry stems from fitting in social situations. So Lindsay, once again the female interest in this novel, really struggles with consistency in her identity, and knowing where she fits in, or she even wants to fit in the first place. And she's very upset when she's talking to Colin in this passage on page 150. She says, she's talking again about where she fits in, and she goes, "I'm full of shit. I'm never myself. I've got a southern accent around the oldsters. I'm a nerd for graphs and deep thoughts around you. I'm Miss Perfect Bubbly Princess with Colin. I'm nothing. the thing about chameleoning your way through life is that it gets to where nothing is real. So she doesn't know who she is. She doesn't know where she fits in, and she is really stressed out about that. And this really ties back in with her passage earlier, where we saw her changing her appearance, going from goth to popular girl, making them like her, to fit in and to feel wanted in the social situation of her high school. And the beauty of middle school is that we are allowed to give students all of these exploratory options where they can find out, what am I interested in? Who am I? How do I want to act? And that's really what middle school is all about, which is a great opportunity for us to help them with this social emotional development. So Colin, the main protagonist again, also struggles with the concern of fitting in. He, by chance, gets this date with a really, really hot girl from his high school. I mean, she is tan, she's Italian, she's perfect, her name is Maria. I mean, come on, it doesn't get any better than that. And he has a rose bought. I mean, he is like walking out the door to go on a date with this girl, and all of a sudden he has like an epiphany moment where he's like, I don't know if I really want to do this or not. So he thinks about some things that I'd like to share with you. This is on page 115. He imagined the best possible scenario, after the date. Maria actually, improbably, ends up liking him. Whereupon, Colin and his son vault up the social ladder and get to eat lunch at a different table and get invited to some parties. Now, Colin had seen enough movies to know what happens when dorks go to cool kid parties. Generally, the dorks either get thrown into a pool or they become drunk, vacuous, cool kids themselves. Neither seemed like a good option. So Colin is looking at these social options, right? And he decided, you know what, that's not for me, I don't fit in there. And he decided to stay in his kind of nerd status socially. So he calls up the date. That's kind of important. But anyway, he calls up the date and stays in the nerd. All right, so then the book also exemplifies the effects of peer pressure on adolescents. Colin and his son, while they're in Tennessee, change a lot, and they end up drinking, fugging girls, and even going on a feral pig, later known as Satan pig, hunt. And this is all an attempt to fit in. And this is pretty natural behavior for adolescents, right? But then the book closes with a really, really warm and fuzzy social fitting in moment for Colin. And he finds his home base socially. And I'm not going to tell you with who. I'm not going to tell you why or for what or anything. But I will tell you it's on page 215. And it's the last paragraph of the novel. It says, Colin's skin was alive with a feeling of connection to everyone in that car and everyone not in it. And he was feeling not unique in the very best way possible. So that's what our adolescents are striving for, right? This warm, fuzzy feeling of, yes, this is where I fit in. Yes, this is where I belong. And this not unique feeling, right? That feeling of fitting in. So that's really important to our adolescents. One last thing about emotional social development is the adult relationships that adolescents often strive for. So as children transition from childhood to adolescence and beyond, they are often may start to idolize and imitate other adults in an attempt to feel more mature, seem more mature as they're distancing from themselves from their parents. So Colin definitely does this with a character named Crazy Keith. And Crazy Keith is a psychologist who studies his learning behaviors and his habits and those sorts of things. Colin refers to his psychologist as his best friend, and he really, really looks forward to their weekly meetings. And I think it's important that we expect adolescents to do the same with us and to look at us as a mentor, and for us to take those mentoring opportunities that could ease the social development for students, especially if they're already struggling with this feeling of fitting in. All right, so that's the social emotional big picture of the novel, and now we're going to talk about the cognitive development in the novel. So as students are developing from childhood to middle school, they are developing cognitively from thinking about concrete concepts to transitioning to thinking about more abstract, critical types of thinking. And Colin is really the only character who is intellectually driven at all. But he demonstrates an overwhelming ability to make these unseen connections as he creates his theorem. And remember, Colin is all about discovering the unknown, right? Making concepts that no one has ever done before. And he wants his name on this wall of mysterious geniuses. And I wish I could explain this theorem to you, but I can't. English major, woo! But basically he's proving the abstract concept of relationship predictability. And there's a whole appendix that shares all of the math and how it works, and it's real live math, which is cool. But here's the theorem, which is crazy long, and I hope you can understand it, because I can't, but it's cool. So I've been thinking a little bit about Colin and what will happen if we end up with a Colin in our class, right? So a kid who is ridiculously gifted, can read at age 2, and we have to figure out a way to challenge him and to push him and to keep him learning. And I don't really have the answer. Like, what do we do with a kid like that? There's all kinds of provisions and training for us when it comes to disabled students, but I'm not sure how it works the other way around. So maybe we could chat about that in our discussion forum and bounce some ideas off of each other. But, all right, so one other cognitive development thing. I noticed that Hassan, the best friend, has also reached the abstract thinking stage. And he's thinking about going to college, reaching goals, considering not yet realized possibilities for his future as well. So he's moved beyond the concrete thinking of childhood as well. So they are definitely in late adolescent thinking stages, as they have basically all, since they are 18, have moved away from that concrete thinking. All right, so the last type of development is moral development. And this is kind of a sensitive subject because there are so many different approaches to morality that are embraced by our culture and very accepted. And adolescents are developing these morals that will stick with them forever. And I think Hassan is the best example of this journey to moral development in the novel. So he was raised Muslim, and in this novel is surrounded by a bunch of non-religious teens. And the term haram is brought up several times in Katherines, and it means forbidden by Islam. So, for instance, Hassan says, oh, I can't date that girl. She's haram. Or he is getting ready to go on the feral pig hunt with Colin, and on page 156, they're kind of joking around. It's funny. And he goes, so they're going on a pig hunt. Remember, they're in Tennessee. Don't ask questions. I don't know. And he says, today is a day that no pigs will die. I'm not even allowed to eat the motherfuckers. I'm sure not going to kill one. And he's not allowed to eat one, the footnote says, because eating pork is haram in Islam. So he also prays every morning, and there's a couple points where other characters are like, can you just shut up, like we are sleeping? And he has to stand up for that moral code that he believes in. And even though it's used as kind of a source of comedy in this book, this is a very real challenge that a lot of adolescents are facing. And those were only a couple of instances. It kind of has this moral arc, right? He starts out here where he's talking about haram and he's very strict with himself, and then he kind of loses it. He's like off the path. He dates a haram girl. He drinks. Does a couple things like that, and then he kind of gets back on the wagon next time we see him in a social situation and is like, yo, I can't drink, I'm back on the wagon, that's not my thing. And like I said, this is like a very real issue for students as they move away from their parents' values, what they've been raised as, and develop their own morals that they are going to stand by for the rest of their life. So most schools already have in place some sort of character building program that will build characteristics like trustworthiness, fairness, citizenship. And we participate as educators largely through our role as our, like, you know, leadership role model, I got it. Anyway, so as role models. And I think it's important that we don't crush our students' personal values, especially when it comes to religion. And if Hassan was our student, we would definitely need to make accommodations as graciously as possible so that he would feel open and free to share and practice his religious values and moral code in the school. So this is another area where I think that we could really celebrate multicultural diversity in our classroom and make the Hassans of our future classrooms feel as safe and accepted as any other student would feel in our classroom. Right, so that is my connections, physical, emotional, cognitive, and moral, to an abundance of Katherines. I hope it was enough information to wet your whistle and not enough to spoil anything. I hope. It's such a good book. I hope you guys read it. I can't wait to see everyone else's posts and get some great discussions going. So yeah, that's what I got. Bye guys.